for the minister is to make it a point that we renew, recover social and economic plan of South Africa. We must make it a point that with the little resources that we have, we make the lives of our people better. There is a serious issue on the rate of unemployment, the decaying infrastructure. We said to the minister, those are some of the things that he must look at. But we know this is a midterm. He cannot do major changes on this. But be that as may, he must be able to sustain what government have started and plan better for the February budget speech.
Plans is one thing, translating them into fruits, it's another thing. How do you think he should be able to do that?
We have agreed as leaders of political parties this morning with the minister that we are going to have an economic dialogue as party leaders and minister, and all of us must come together and save and rescue our country. There are certain things that we have to compromise and sacrifice in order for us to turn around, especially the economic situation. We cannot keep on borrowing money. We said he must also try by all means to lower the debt, because it is unaffordable. But at the same time, there are basic things that are needed by South Africans. The issue of water, road infrastructure, those are the main things that we can turn this economy around. Because if we are focused on infrastructure, it will create more jobs and sustainable jobs. So we are saying, let's call all South Africans to work together. We all further said we must also involve the trade unions so that we can be able to agree what is going to happen when it comes to salary negotiations, given the situation in which we find ourselves in. We are positive that we are going to turn around through this economy, through the economic recovery plan, but it needs us to prioritize out of the priorities that we have.
Just quickly on the passing away of Mr. FW de Klerk, as the ANC, what's your message?
We are saying to the family, let them receive our condolences. Mr. de Klerk was far better than any other leader which led South Africa, and we are saying for that, he was not our hero, but he did what he was supposed to do.
I'm going to ask you, I think there's an entourage of the president approaching the National Assembly steps as we continue this conversation on the passing away of Mr. de Klerk as the ANC.
He was not our hero. He did what he was supposed to do because the pressure was mounting. He could not sit on a boiling lid. South Africans were resolved that if we are not getting our freedom, we're going to take arms and fight. So what he did was to save the country from the civil war, because we're far ready than that. So let him rest in peace. He has served South Africans as much as possible.
Thank you so much, ANC Chief Whip, Ms. Phemi Majodina, giving us a view on the passing away of the FW de Klerk, former president of the country. And we'll now cross back to studio. Okay, it seems like the president has just entered. If you can see there on the steps, is followed closely by Ms. Phemi Majodina, and this is the entourage of the president. And of course, he'll be closely monitoring what the finance minister will be saying in his medium-term budget policy statement. Of course, they must have had discussion in terms of the direction of the country and the economy. Of course, we do expect that after this entourage has left and parked at Tenes, where it's the presidential office, we'll have the minister and his entourage walking into the National Assembly. For now, guys, it's back to you in studio.
Thanks very much, Bulelani Philip there. The coronavirus pandemic has dealt a huge blow.
Okay, Minister's coming. Come here. What's he wearing?
Well, there you have it. The finance minister's just walked in, and I suppose this is the entourage that everyone looks out for, especially as we get to that build-up, flanked there by the Director General of the National Treasury and, of course, SARS Commissioner Edward Kisweto. So some very interesting, I suppose, viewpoints from many of the people we've spoken to, Bulelani.
Yes, quite interesting that, the finance minister has largely stayed away from the public eye since his appointment. I think that's what makes a lot of people anticipate this moment that is coming out publicly, and is probably going to perhaps maybe stamp his authority. We don't know, or whether he's going to make bold decisions, but this is his moment. Let's have him bask in the glory, and we'll talk after the budget speech in terms of what have been the impressions of both civil society as well as business and labor unions.
As you do mention, it is his first time, it's his first one. Lots of pressure from different parts of the economy, that balancing act that a lot of our experts have been talking about. But there's also the issue of whether he will bring in some of the ideological aspects into the budget. We don't know, but we're going to link back to studio for that crucial medium-term budget policy statement, and we'll be with you afterwards. Back to you in studio.
Thanks very much, colleagues.
Recording in progress.
Madam Speaker.
There will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. Honorable members, before we proceed with today's business, I wish to announce that the vacancy which occurred in the National Assembly due to the passing of Mr. C. Mackenzie has been filled by the nomination of Dr. V.N. Khumalo with effect from the 9th of September 2021. The member has made and subscribed the oath in the Speaker's office. I welcome you, Honorable Member. Lastly, in the interest of safety for all present in the chamber, please keep your masks on and sit in your designated areas. I thank you. The Secretary will read the first to fourth orders together.
Medium-term budget policy statement, introduction of the Adjustments Appropriation Bill, introduction of the Rates and Monetary Amounts and Amendment of Revenue Laws Bill, introduction of the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill.
I now recognize the Honorable, the Minister of Finance from the Chamber.
Madam Speaker, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, the Deputy President David Mabuza, Cabinet colleagues, members of the Executive Committee for Finance in various provinces, the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, honorable members. I'm honored to table the following documents before this House. The 2021 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2021 Adjustment Appropriation Bill, the 2021 Rates, Monetary Accounts and Amendment Revenue Laws Bill, the 2021 Taxation Law Amendments Bill, Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill, the Revised Fiscal Framework, the 2021 Adjustment Estimate of National Expenditure, the 2021 Medium-Term Budget Policy Statement. Madam Speaker, we are tabling the 2021 Medium-Term Budget Policy Statement under unprecedented conditions. The COVID-19 crisis has caused severe disruptions to economies the world over. It has forced governments to pay even greater attention to the task of saving lives and preserving livelihoods. In addition, to the high cost to human life, the crisis is likely to leave deep and long-lasting scars on the global economy and human lives. The scattering impact of the crisis is evident in the increased debt levels, income vulnerabilities, while unemployment, poverty, and inequality are deepening. This is a crisis like no other. Almost 4 months ago, in certain parts of our country, we witnessed disturbing incidences of violence and destruction of property never seen in post-apartheid South Africa. Once again, lives were lost and people's livelihoods were taken away. Infrastructure was destroyed, investor confidence was battered, and our economic prospects were dealt a severe blow. These incidents expose the fragility of South Africa's social, economic, and political compact. They remind us of the ease with which the plight of the poor and unemployed can be exploited to achieve political ends. I wish to take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, and honored members, to pay tribute to the resilience of the people of South Africa during these hard and trying times. We are a resilient and dynamic people. On many occasions, when faced with extreme difficulties, we have always managed to emerge even stronger. On the 1st of this month, our country held its 6th democratic local government elections. Once again, our people responded to the Freedom Charter's clarion call that the people shall govern. And no government can justly claim authority unless it's based on the will of the people. And I think we must respect that decision. I was saying to somebody else, I was told and taught in the movement that the strategic task of the National Liberation Movement is transfer of power to the people, not to the ANC, transfer of power to the people. We have become an instrument. We are fortunate that the people of South Africa for almost 3 decades have selected us to be the instrument to exercise that power on their behalf. And that's a privilege we should respect. And I'm quite convinced, despite the setbacks we have had, that our people continue to support the African National Congress. That's why we said, so I have said they understand no government can justly claim authority unless it's based on the will of the people. It's an important event. Madam Speaker, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, global economic recovery is continuing. However, high and more persistent inflation, as well as the outlook for commodity prices, have brought with them the uncertainty about medium-term long-term economic growth. The global economy is projected to grow at 5.9% in 2021 and 49% in 2022. Advanced economies are expected to return to pre-pandemic expectations for the growth in 2022, while emerging markets and developing economies are expected to remain below pre-pandemic projections. Notably, growth has recovered faster than employment. In the first half of 2021, the South African economy recovered more quickly than expected, reflecting less stringent COVID-19 restrictions, along with lower interest rate, support from strong international demand, and higher commodity prices. We now expect the South African economy to grow by 5.1% in 2021, from a 6.4% contraction in 2024. Over the next 3 years, the growth of the local economy is expected to average 1.7%, reflecting some structural weaknesses such as inadequate electricity supply. Madam Speaker, the strength of the South African economic recovery will also depend on the rollout of vaccine. A higher take-up of vaccine will reduce the risk of future waves of the pandemic and associated disruptions to economic activity. The speed and scale of vaccination, therefore, is of essence. There should be no room for hesitancy. Madam Speaker, this year marks the 25th of the medium-term budget policy statement to be tabled in this House. We have indeed come a long way in improving transparency and credibility of our budget processes. The 2021 medium-term budget policy statement is about navigating South Africa's path to economic and social recovery, drawing on the resilience of our people, as well as restoring the sustainability of our public finances and the dignity of our people in the face of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. The medium-term budget policy statement charts a course that demonstrates government's unflinching commitment to fiscal sustainability, enabling long-term growth by narrowing the budget deficit and stabilizing the debt. Critical to the fiscal path we've chosen is the need to be clear and unambiguous on the trade-offs we're willing to make as a nation. We cannot do everything we want at the same time. Equally important is the faster implementation of structural reforms to unlock greater private sector investment, economic growth, and job creation. A fast-growing economy will allow for greater revenue collection, making it impossible for more comprehensive responses to the challenges we face. Madam Speaker, considering the economic outlook and the risk associated with it, it is critical that we accelerate economic reforms for long-run growth. These reforms should focus on improving competitiveness, productivity, investment, and employment. Our first and immediate task in this regard must be to ensure stable energy supply, reduce the risk of load shedding, and accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources. All of our efforts over the past 13 years have been to fix Eskom, instead of securing supply of adding additional capacity to the grid. We have already made significant progress in correcting this. The amendment of Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act of 2006 has raised the licensing threshold from 1 megawatt to about 100 megawatts. It has also made it possible for private power generation to sell directly to customers. This will alleviate the risk of power cuts. The amended regulations will further enable municipalities to sell generation or procure power directly from independent power producers. We've also begun to reduce our reliance on Eskom by diversifying our primary energy sources. The gains from these diversifications are demonstrated by the outcome of the most recent round of the renewable energy in independent power producers program. The 25 projects that are part of the latest round of bid window 5 will generate more than 2,500 megawatts of power at a weighted average price of 47.3 cents per kilowatt hour. This is the cheapest rate achieved in the history of the program and is among the lowest rates ever achieved worldwide. Over the long term, creating a competitive energy market will help contain the cost of generating electricity and support GDP growth. The second set of reforms must continue to focus on about improving the efficiency of South Africa's logistic framework to support economic growth. In this regard, government has announced the Corporation of Transnational Ports Authority as an independent subsidiary of Transnet and appointed an interim board. This will create an incentive for efficiency and competitiveness between port service providers, reducing delays, improving services, and introducing cost discipline. Transnet Freight Rail will allow third-party access in the freight rail network by the end of 2022. Allowing private rail operators to use the freight rail network will bolster systems volume and capacity. The third area is the speed resolution of issues blocking the release of high-demand spectrum and making affordable data available to firms and households. I'm aware that a lot of work is being done to overcome obstacles to this release of spectrum. The majority of the problems we're facing in this regard are not of government's creation. Largely, what is a problem is the litigation between the parties, and therefore delaying progress in this regard. We would probably appeal to the affected parties to find an amicable solution as soon as possible. Madam Speaker, we must ensure the completion of digital migration by March 2022. This is crucial to enable the full use of additional spectrum that will be auctioned. Fourthly, to boost tourism and attract skill, the now completed e-visa system will be rolled out to 15 countries by March 22. Fifthly, in the water sector, legislative drafting and financial modeling have been done to establish a national water resource infrastructure agency responsible for improving the management of bulk water resources. The Department of Water and Sanitation is fast-tracking in its application process to ensure that the 90-day target for issuing single-use water licenses will be implemented by March 22 as part of improving ease of doing business. Madam Speaker, this package of reforms demonstrate government's commitment to create a conducive environment for the growth and development of our economy. In addition, we must remove regulatory burden on small and medium enterprise and cooperatives. In this regard, we'll investigate different forms of support, even for township, inner city, and rural enterprise. I must make the point, particularly in areas such as the Bandustan, we've got a lot of factories space that was created during the Bandustan, where they talk about Timbaza, Fort Jackson, Isitebe, Kwakwa, Babelekhe, all those areas. We need to make sure that we create an investment conducive that those areas must be revived. That is going to require some part of incentive support from government. Also of importance is the need to strive for policy coherence and policy certainty across government. We must also continue to strengthen the capacity of the state to implement policy and intervene in the economy in a manner that enhances and not inhibits growth. Madam Speaker, the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan identifies infrastructure development as a critical component of changing our economic fortunes. In total, 62 priority infrastructure projects were gazetted last year. An additional 55 new projects from various sectors valued at around 595 billion rand, with a funding gap of around 451 billion, were recently unveiled. Therefore, we'll need partnership with the private sector to fulfill this funding gap. The infrastructure fund is an important intervention towards our strategic goal of ensuring that total investment in public infrastructure is nearly 30% of gross fiscal capital formation by 2030, as envisioned in the National Development Plan. We'll maintain our commitment to the fund, including allocating 100 billion over the decade from 2019-2020, as committed in the previous budget. Further work is being done to unlock more infrastructure projects for execution. There is a strong collaboration with government departments and other institutions such as Infrastructure South Africa. The Development Bank of Southern Africa prepares for projects within investment valued 84.5 billion in the telecommunications, water and sanitation, as well as transport sectors. Madam Speaker, the facilitation of trade across our borders is an important enabling economic activity, especially as we're implementing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Across our continent, infrastructure is underdeveloped and systems are outdated, resulting in inefficiencies and long delays. This also breeds criminality. Last week, I visited the Beit Bridge border post with the SARS Commissioner and the DG to assess firsthand the operational challenges at the port of entry. Beit Bridge typically processes around 900 commercial vehicles and 25,000 travelers during the peak period per day. It simply cannot cope. It is estimated that the economic cost of the inefficiencies at Beit Bridge just to South Africa amount to several billions of rands per year. We must act with speed to improve the infrastructure and modernize the customs systems at all our ports. This will contribute significantly towards greater revenue collection and trade facilitation and border protection. Let me reiterate, Madam Speaker, that government cannot drive economic recovery and growth alone because most areas of economic activity are dominated by the private sector, including investment, employment, and innovation. In this, we strongly call on greater social compact to raise growth and improve livelihoods. Madam Speaker, following the global financial crisis of 2008, South Africa adopted a counter-cyclical fiscal policy. This means that as the economy underperformed, government increased its deficit to counter the impact of the crisis. We spent more than we received in tax and revenues on a consistent basis. This, together with the composition of spending, did not meaningfully increase growth. Instead of getting higher growth from fiscal expansion, our debt continued to rise. The stock of debt, the 4 trillion in debt that we now owe, is incurring debt service costs that will become the largest portion of spending compared to individual functions from next year. These debt service costs are not discretionary. In other words, we cannot avoid paying them. Their effect, therefore, is to crowd out other spending priorities. Debt service costs are expected to rise from 269.2 billion in 2021-22, that's the next financial year, to about 365.8 billion in 2024-25. This is higher than the health and police service budget. Nevertheless, there have been some positive developments on the fiscal side. Tax collections have exceeded expectations in the short term. Revenue for 21-22 is now estimated to reach 1.5 trillion, compared to 1.4 trillion at the time of the 2021 budget in February. This is an upward revision of about 120 billion rand. The consolidated budget deficit is expected to be 7.8% of GDP in 21-22, gradually lowering to 4.9% in 24-25. Taxes paid by the mining sector have been strong due to the commodity price rally which continued through the first half of 2021. Minister Mandasha was boasting the other day and said, no, I'm feeding you guys these days because of what's happening in mining. So the mining sector has been doing well, has given us sufficient revenue. About 85% of that 120 billion rand is from the mining sector. Notable, however, precious metals prices have started to soften. This means the revenue gains from the commodity prices rally are expected to be temporary. Therefore, we should be careful about our spending commitments. You will recall what I said earlier on. Because of the temporary nature of that revenue, you can't commit it to long-term projects. You've got to commit it to short-term projects. We should not make permanent spending commitments from short-term revenue benefits. This approach is embedded in our fiscal framework. We are of the view that revenue can be increased with a more effective and efficient revenue collection authority. In this regard, SARS has already started to utilize the additional funding that we provided to them in 2021 budget by hiring skilled tax and custom auditors and data scientists to boost compliance and collection, as well as accelerate modernization. Madam Speaker, the additional revenue due to the commodity price rally created space for government to provide additional support for poverty and employment programs this year, without negatively impacting the fiscal position. Following on from the fiscal response last year, government has provided an additional 48.9 billion rand in fiscal support due to the unrest that took place in July and the impact of the COVID-19 lockdown. This includes the 37.9 billion in direct fiscal support. We are now making an additional 11 billion available to the South African Special Risk Insurance Association, which is called SASRIA, to enable them to continue settling legitimate claims from businesses' damages during the unrest. The criminal activity we witnessed during the unrest reminds us that crime continues to be a blight on our society. It undermines confidence in our recovery and hinders our long-term economic development. To strengthen the fight against crime, we have allocated additional funding to the South African National Defence Force and the police services. All South Africans deserve to be safe. We must not fail in this. Madam Speaker, the medium-term budget policy statement is also about continuing our country's response to COVID-19 and its resultant economic and social impact by providing additional short-term support where needed. This year, we're increasing non-interest spending by 59.4 billion. The revised 2021-22 fiscal framework includes 3 billion in the contingency reserve for additional vaccine purchases and 11 billion as a provincial allocation, as I've said, to SASRIA for a risk coverage in the wake of the unrest in July. Aside from the allocation in the special appropriation bill, I tabled in August. There was a special appropriation bill we tabled in August. Most of the adjustment, 20.5 billion, are to cater for the higher than budgeted public sector wage agreement. Madam Speaker and honorable members, our budget over the next 3 years is focused on service delivery and is highly redistributive. You know, I was asked by journalists in the press conference, is this budget pro-poor? I said to this journalist, tell me this question. If 60% of non-interest spending, 60% of non-interest spending is on the social wage, what does that mean? When people say this budget is not pro-poor, they must answer that question. Consolidated government spending is expected to increase from 2.1 trillion to 2.24 trillion over the 3 years. Put differently, government will spend more than 6.4 trillion over the next 3 years. A key concern of government is the huge unemployment challenge we face as a country. South Africa continues to grapple with the long-run unemployment, and in the current conditions, unemployment is lagging the economic recovery. Government recognizes that we need more private sector jobs driven by a strong and growing investment climate. At the same time, the state must play a role in mitigating the impact of this crisis. And that's important, I must repeat this. Government must play an important role in mitigating the impact of this crisis. We've never said that should not happen. Accordingly, the 2022 budget will allocate almost 74 billion rand towards public employment programs over the MTF. In addition, further opportunities will be explored for supporting employment through other means. Government will also maintain its commitment to support fee-free higher education. In this regard, funding for fee-free higher education and training has been increased. In the 2021 government spending, 44.7 billion is in this function. This has been increased to 56.8 billion in the current year. Over the 22 MTF, funding for higher education will total 158.8 billion. Honourable members, as you are aware, the current social relief of distress grant is coming to an end in March. Let me emphasize this thing. Bathi abantu ngu-treasury nama anesisukela abantu kwethu. Nasukela. This government said it is extending it up to the end of March. Urhulumente otshileyo up to the end of March. Treasury usathe cwaka. Bayaxhanisa abanye phandle apho kuthiwa hayi uTreasury uthe iyaphela. Hayi urhulumente uthe extend until the end of March. Kwalo urhulumente will decide, this government will decide whether to extend it or not to extend it. Yekani uTreasury lahlale yedwa. Mama ufuna urhulumente ngoba the budget is a decision of the government, not of Treasury. If naxa ndimapha ndinebhongo ngoba bendiye kulaa cabinet yaphefumla. Not mna. The grant has benefited about 9.5 million South Africans. This is over and above the existing social security grants. Today, 27.8 million South Africans are social grant recipients of one or another. This accounts for about 46% of our population. At the same time, the number of people working has declined, further underlining the critical flaws in our economy. Our total spending on the social wage is also very high. This amount has grown to 806 billion from 2018 to 2019 to 1.1 trillion in 2021-2022. That's about 60% of total non-interest spending. Annually goes towards housing development, free basic services, employment programs, and so on and so on. It goes to that. So about 60% of total non-interest spending, as I've said earlier, annually goes towards housing development, free basic services, employment programs, health, education, social grants, among other things. Overall, the South African government is acknowledged as having one of the most comprehensive and expansive social security systems in the world. And there are ongoing discussions about social safety net. Details on our interventions with regard to the social security net will be provided in the February 2022 budget. Yavaga, indeed. Lo mbuzo abantu bawubuza esitrateni uyawuphendula kwangilo rhulumente kodwa ndayithetha loo nto ngoFebruwari. Bafuna ndiphendule ingafiki ixesha laloo nto. Alikafiki. NgoFebruary ndizawuphendula ekubeni after government has pronounced on this matter. Yeah. Let me however, reiterate that a permanent solution in responding to these challenges is to achieve higher and sustainable level of economic growth. Madam Speaker, state-owned companies are intended to be important as enablers of economic development. Many SOEs, however, have been badly managed and have failed to deliver. In many instances, they've also been devastated by state capture, making them increasingly reliant on government. Since 2013, for instance, government has directed more than 290 billion rand to bail out state-owned companies at the expense of important social expenditure. Going forward, the restructuring of state-owned companies, informed by an assessment of their strategic relevance, is a priority. In this medium-term budget policy statement, no additional funding is provided for state-owned companies. The exception is to this is where guarantees have been called by creditors and conditions have been met by the OEC in question within the context of their strategic importance. Now, I was asked by a journalist, what does this mean? Did you know this is tough love? Tough love. These institutions, we've got to love them, support them, but not a laissez-faire. At some point, we need to draw a line and say, I don't know, performing a tough love. We must be prepared to consolidate some of our state-owned entities and let go of those that are not longer considered strategically relevant. Our retirement reforms, before getting to retirement reforms, when I took over, I was appointed, Mr. President, I got a couple of calls, I suspect as the teachers. Ungasilibala umboweni ebesesithembisile noko mntakwethu. Ungazi-withdraw la withdrawal. Bebese bathembisile umboweni. So I'm answering that question now, but not in full. On retirement reforms, we are proposing measures to boost household savings by increasing preservation before retirement and to increase flexibility through partial access to retirement funds through what is called a two-pot system. In terms of this, system, individuals will be able to access contribution to one end of the pot, while contributing to other pot would be saved until retirement. These measures would require legislative changes. These measures would require legislative changes and further consultation. Limited withdrawals would also depend on affordability and liquidity of the fund. National Treasury will publish shortly a discussion document on the details of this proposal to obtain inputs before further announcement to be made in February budget 2022. The reason it has got to be made in February 2022 is because we will have to pass it together with the tax legislation. We'll have to pass legislation to give effect to it. To ensure equitable allocation of resources to provinces in response to the need to strengthen service delivery, the health component of the provincial equitable share has been revised and will be implemented from the year 2022-2023 financial year. Meanwhile, provinces receive almost 2 trillion in transfers over the next from MTF. That is starting from the next financial year. These allocations are made to maintain our commitment to the delivery of education, health, and other social services to our people. Madam Speaker, local government remains at the coalface of service delivery. It is the sphere of government closest to our people. Over the 2022 MTF, municipalities will receive more than 450 billion rand from the national fiscus. Our immediate task is to build capable and stable local government that delivers service effectively and efficiently. The 2022 budget will give details on the steps we are taking in this regard. Currently, there are 43 municipalities countrywide which are financially in crisis, with another 100 municipalities at risk of similar crisis. To deal with the 43 municipalities already in crisis, I have specified the expected course of action to be taken by all premiers, the provincial executives, and MEC in ensuring that the problems in these municipalities are dealt with in a more sustainable manner. This is in line with the national government's commitment to ensuring sound fiscal management and greater fiscal responsibility in the local government sphere. Let me take this opportunity to call upon the newly elected councillors to work hard to improve the state of their municipalities and to cooperate with the support initiatives of provincial and national government. For our growth and recovery agenda to succeed, we need a state that is capable, well-governed, and a society that is free of crime and corruption. Within government, there continues to be inefficiency in government expenditure due to corruption, wastage, and various other forms of maladministration. One critical part of our reform agenda is in the procurement system. I'm therefore delighted to announce that we are reaching the final stage of the finalization of the public procurement bill. We anticipate that that bill will be tabled before Parliament early next year in the financial year. Madam Speaker, the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegation of state capture, chaired by Deputy Justice Zondo, will soon present its report with its findings to the President. We look forward to swift action by the criminal justice institution to prosecute those responsible for the damage caused by the state capture project. For our part, we are working with all the irrelevant authorities and financial sector regulators to address deficiencies in our system and to sharpen our ability to deal more effectively and more speedily with all the financial crumbs. In early 2020, we introduced a loan guarantee scheme which enabled commercial banks to support firms in distress as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. This program has been concluded. In its place, we are considering a new business support measure to enable affected businesses to bounce back. This will be done by providing expanded funding options, broadening the types of financial institutions we can provide this function to include DFIs and non-banks. We are working closely with the South African Reserve Bank, the Banking Association, and other stakeholders to finalize this proposal. Further details will be announced shortly. Madam Speaker, in Glasgow, in the United Kingdom, nations of the world gathered for the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of Parties, what is called COP26. Our climate change mitigation commitments are bold. However, we need global coordinated initiatives to succeed in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. If we invest in the correct infrastructure for the future, we'll be able to take advantage of opportunities to increase our trade with other countries. We note and welcome promises for funding to support our transition to a low-carbon economy. We strongly welcome this commitment and will engage further on the details and obligations of all parties in this regard. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, let me reflect on key points we're making today. This medium-term budget policy statement is a call to action, a change to ourselves to once again renew the promise of a country that many fought for and have sacrificed much. We must continue to focus on saving lives and livelihoods. Between now and February 2022, we'll be working on the details of measures to deal with the socio-economic challenges we face, especially the crisis of unemployment and poverty. This must be done in a manner that does not depart from the strategy of stabilizing government debt. Recommendation in this regard will depend on the availability of resources, of course, including policy trade-offs and reprioritization. We reiterate that the key to resolving our development challenges is the need to push ahead with structural reforms necessary to unlock the growth of our economy. These reforms will include bringing additional electricity capacity into the grid, in addition to fixing ESCOM. Honourable members, the task of growing our economy requires that we work together as South Africans, singly-minded in our understanding that working alone, none of us can achieve the desired results. Madam Speaker, I wish to thank the President, Deputy President for their leadership and guidance during these difficult times. I want also to express my appreciation to Deputy Minister David Masondo for his support. The Treasury staff, led by the Director General Mogajane, continue to undertake their task with dedication, and I express my thanks to them. My sincere thanks also goes to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, Mr. Edward Casewest, and the hard-working team of SARS. Many thanks to them, to the Governor number 10 of the South African Reserve Bank, Governor Lesesha Khanyo, and the staff of the bank for their work and support. Let me also thank my colleagues in the Ministers Committee on Budget and the Budget Council who have shared the load of tough decisions that have been made in the current climate. Similarly, the Parliamentary Committee of Finance and Appropriation, whose impressive record of processing the bills we table in is an unblemished, even as we have come to them more often than not in the past since last year. Finally, I want to thank also my family. I've had difficult times over the past few months, including my wife as co-host at times. And to millions of South Africans whose resilience and courage during these times of pandemic and economic difficulties, you are an inspiration to all of us. We have privilege to serve the public sector. I thank you.
Order. I thank the Honorable Minister. The papers tabled by the Minister will be referred to the relevant committees. Order, Honorable Members. Today we have received the news of the passing on of Mr. de Klerk, and at the appropriate time, Parliament will have the honor to pay tribute. At this point, this now concludes the business for the day, and the House is adjourned. I thank you, honorable members.
Take a picture for me quickly with my brother. Hate these masks. Hey, what's happened? Is it gone?
Shadow Minister, right? Finance, Deputy Finance.
Have a quick look there.
For Finance.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes.
Hello? On air or for interviews? Okay, I'll let him know. Yeah. Okay. Hello? Now he's speaking to somebody else. Okay.
Hello?
I can't hear on in the ear, so I'm not sure. Hello? Okay. Well, there you have it. It was the moment we've all been having, rather waiting for. But in the background, all of that, we did hear the news of the passing of former President FW de Klerk. And to get reaction on that, before we even get into the aspects of the medium-term budget policy statement, we are joined by Dion George, who is the Deputy Shadow Minister for Finance for the DA. Dion, thank you so much for your time. Initial thoughts on the passing of former President FW de Klerk.
We're very sorry at the passing of the former president. He made a very important contribution to South Africa's democracy, and our sincere condolences to his family and to his friends and to his colleagues.
So let's get into the business of the day, the aspects that came out in this particular budget speech. I mean, there's a whole host here. My scribbles, I hope I will be able to read them quite properly. But let's touch on the key aspects for you. What stood out?
Well, we set out our expectations beforehand, and those were disappointed. That the minister's saying that any additional overrun on revenue because of the commodity boom will be used towards reducing debt and also supporting vulnerable people. We support that. But we were specifically looking for steps, action steps to be taken to accelerate our post-pandemic economic growth. We didn't see that. We wanted a lot more on Eskom. Although the minister spoke about generation, increasing generation, there's certainly no clear plan, and that is very bad for business, as we know, and very bad for growth. Also, we wanted to hear something about accelerating business opportunities, for example, for smaller business and entrepreneurs. Hopefully, we'll see something in February then. Also, if we look at debt management, it's clear that the debt is continuing to rise, and that debt is now the biggest expenditure. It's more, if you add up health and you add up social development and you add up other support, you find that it is much more than that. And the problem that we have with that is obviously we're heading for a debt spiral. So I think that the steps that he has proposed aren't going to work. Also, the public sector wage bill, we certainly wanted to hear something about that, and we didn't have that. We also wanted to have some kind of commitment about not increasing taxes and not having any additional taxes. We probably see something about that in February as well, but we won't support any additional taxes. We are pleased that he is talking about supporting vulnerable people, because that is very important. Also on pension reform, he has said something about it. We don't know what he's going to say in February. We certainly believe that he should be allowing members to leverage their pension funds in the form of a loan, for example, but there does seem to be progress on that. But on a whole, we don't see the pathway forward for reducing debt, and we don't see the pathway forward on economic growth.
From a spending point of view, does it look a little bit interesting, especially when you look at it from the spending point for the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, if you look at spending, the plan is to actually reduce spending, but I mean the proof is in the eating. You have to see that actually happens, and I don't have very much confidence that is actually going to happen.
Thank you so much for your time. Well, we're now going to cross to my colleague Bolelane Philip, who's also standing by for more analysis.
Thank you so much, Nastasia. But before we get into the mini-budget reactions, we want to take reaction on the passing away of the former president, FW de Klerk. Joining me now is ACDP Chief Whip, Mr. Steve Swarte. As the ACDP, your message on the passing of former Mr. de Klerk?
Well, we'd like to, on behalf of the ACDP, express our deepest condolences to the family and friends of former President FW de Klerk. He played a vital role in the peaceful transition of South Africa in 1994, in the run-up to 1994, and our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family at this sad time.
Let's go straight to the budget presented this afternoon. As the ACDP, do you think it struck the right chords?
Well, I think firstly, the issue of economic growth, which is up at 5%, is encouraging. There is a slight good news from the budget that was presented in February. That is the economic growth. And of course, we see tax collection is up by 120 billion on the commodity boom. That is encouraging. However, when you look at the fiscal consolidation and you see the debt levels, they are alarmingly high. And as the minister indicated himself, debt service costs now are crowding out the payments and the other budget items, such as job creation and crime. So these are huge concerns. So we have to reduce government expenditure. We've got to stick to the budget ceiling. And of course, to do that, you've got to stimulate economic growth. You have to collect more tax. And of course, what we also have always said, we've got to address corruption so that the money that has been stolen is collected. From the ACDP's perspective, we also believe the lockdown must come to an end. We've got to stimulate economic growth. We've got to implement the restoration path to create jobs and stimulate economic growth.
All right, Steve Swart, ACDP Chief Whip, thank you very much for your time. We now cross to Anastasia for more reaction on the floor.
Thank you so much, Bulelani. Well, I've got Voter Wessels representing the FF Plus to get reaction from him about the medium-term budget policy statement and, of course, the news that we brought to you a little bit earlier on the passing of former President FW de Klerk. Mr. Wessels, thank you so much for your time. Let's start off with the medium-term budget policy statement. What were your thoughts?
Well, the Minister made the correct noises. He said the correct things that will get the economy going. The question will be, is it implementable? And one of the biggest problems currently is that our expenditure is out of control. And the adjustment budget does not really curb expenditure, especially with regards to the public wage bill, and it is still out of control. To actually sustainably save the fiscus and the fiscal position that we are in currently, we need to curb expenditure and we need economic growth. And currently we do not have investor certainty to actually get economic growth going.
Let's touch on the passing of former President FW de Klerk. Your sentiments?
Well, our sincere condolences with his family. It is very sad when someone passes away. He did suffer from cancer, and then there is relief as well. But our sincere condolences. He did make a contribution to South Africa, and he will be remembered for the good and for the bad.
Mr. Wessels, thank you so much for your time. That is Voter Wessels representing the FF Plus, giving us his reaction on that medium-term budget policy statement, also touching on aspects that he thought was missing. Hopefully, as we continue to build up, we will start seeing a little bit more clarity in February. But over to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. Again, of course, we're going to jump straight into the reaction. I've got now the PAC President, Mr. Mzwanele Nyonso. Thank you so much for your time. For the PAC, does this budget appease what you were looking for?
No, it doesn't make sense. I don't even know what this man was saying. He was just here to tell us about his experiences with journalists and questions and answers and how he responded and so on. We want a budget that will talk to the poor people. A budget that will be biased towards the oppressed people. A budget that will come up with jobs because people are unemployed. A budget that will put bread on top of the table of our people. People are suffering. It's 27 years of betrayal and it must end.
You did touch on the issue of a two-pot system for people to access their retirement funds. Are you happy that this may actually assist those people who are debt trapped?
No, definitely. Definitely they must access their retirement funds. It's their money anyway. It would be good if people can try to live a debt-free life. So if they can access those monies, they'll be able to pay their debts, and hopefully they will live a debt-free life. Anyway, everybody wants to live a debt-free life. So if it is true, they must access their money. It's their money anyway. Before these guys steal it, because they steal everything.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mzwanele Nyonso. He is the PAC president. For more reaction, we cross back to Anastasia.
Thank you so much, Bulelani. So now let's look at it from an economic point of view. And to do that, I'm joined by Kim Silberman, who is an economist at Rand Merchant Bank. Kim, thank you so much for your time. Your initial takeaway from this particular medium-term budget policy statement?
Hi, it's a pleasure. Yeah, it's a great budget, but I think there's a lot of risk to the budget. So in terms of the kind of expenditure that they laid out, there's not a lot of detail there. And the sense we got is that there's a lot of discussion still around expenditure items, specifically with respect to a social wage. And I think, come the February budget, we're going to have to see a lot more from Treasury in terms of spending on, not specifically an extension of the COVID grant, but something like that. So, yeah, the additional revenue that they factored in to me seems realistic. I think it could even be higher. And I think investors are going to be very pleased with this budget. I do wonder about kind of the social aspects of the budget, and not a lot was given to those who have been hit hard by the pandemic, and I think those pressures will come. So I mean, the budget was delayed, and I think it was delayed because of those discussions, and I think those discussions haven't been finalized. So we'll have to wait for those discussions to be finalized before we really have a good idea. But from an economic and an investor perspective, we really applaud the Treasury for sticking to their guns. So in terms of a primary surplus, they still expect to reach that by 2024-25, which I think in terms of being struck by COVID and the pandemic, that really was quite a feat. And I think that they should be applauded for that.
Before I throw to my colleague, Bulelani, from a reform perspective, is it encouraging, or do we need a little bit more?
Reform with respect to growth, do you mean? Yes, I mean, there's only so much Treasury can do on that front. And I think that they have really tried hard to emphasize that they want to increase efficiency within departments. So a lot of the cost savings that they point to are not from additional borrowing. So the borrowing has actually come down a bit in my estimation. We're actually going to be borrowing less, and we're paying down some debt, which is all the things we should be doing. So walking a fine line here between pleasing investors, but also leaving some money to be allocated to an increased social wage. But in terms of increased efficiency, I think a lot of the cost cutting is expected to come from increased efficiency within government departments, and that's definitely the right direction. It remains to be seen if we can implement it, but I think Treasury did a good job in terms of giving us the path and showing us where we should be going.
Kim, let's pause on that conversation for now. Now I'm going to throw over to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Thanks once again, Anastasia. Of course, the NFP was complaining earlier on that they're worried about the debt service costs. We're now joined by Mr. Sheikh Imam from the NFP. The finance minister did touch on their concerns around this issue of debt service costs. Do you think it's steering the country and the economy in the right direction?
Okay, thank you. Allow me first of all to extend our condolences on the passing of former President FW de Klerk. Yes, the finance minister has spoken about the issue of debt service costs, and particularly where he talks about the debt now touching almost 4 trillion rand. However, he has not convinced us that there's any mechanisms he's intending to put in place to reduce such debt service costs, and we can only see it increasing. Now, the other problem that we have there is that remember that for the last couple of years, it has been on a steep rise, and very few measures were put in place, particularly when it came to the issue of if you look at your wage bill that we are currently sitting on, it's extremely high. Now, the minister touches on that, but does not give us any solutions as to how you're going to start reducing your consumption charges, because most of your money in this country, even that you borrow, is going towards consumption, and that's what we find that is lacking. Very little has actually come out of the statement made by the minister today. We are not convinced that we're moving in the right path. While we welcome the initiative in trying to give greater assistance to the small businesses, let us not forget that 200 billion rand guarantee was set aside for the banks to give assistance to small businesses. What happened? Only 20 billion of that money was taken. And what is the reason for that? Because of the stringent condition. If small businesses could meet those conditions, then they did not need the money or any loans from the banks, because then they would be self-sufficient. Now, those are the problems that we're sitting in. You talk about social assistance and the issue of the high levels of poverty. He said he's going to talk about it in February. We're hoping there's going to be some kind of relief, for particularly those people that are. Remember, South Africa is sitting, and if you heard what he said, 27.6% of the people in this country are currently on some form of social assistance, which is extremely high and not sustainable.
Mr. Sheikh Imam, thank you so much for your time. He is from the National Freedom Party. For more reaction, we're going to cross back to Anastasia.
Thanks so much, Bulelani. Well, with me, I've got Matthew Parks, who's the Parliamentary Coordinator for COSATU. Thank you so much for your time. The Minister mentioned right on the onset of his speech that this particular speech is about navigating economic growth in South Africa and also social recovery. What would you say has been the main tone and tone for this particular speech?
Look, I think we're a little bit disappointed. We're in the deepest economic recession in a century. Unemployment is 44%. We're not sure out of the speech what's going to really uplift us. There are some good things, the doubling of the presidential employment program, allowing workers access to the pension funds early, further discussions on the COVID-19 350 grant, which will still take place. But on a macro level, we didn't see what is going to really stimulate the economy. Right now, our number one crisis is to grow the economy, to lower unemployment, what is going to be done to fix corruption, to fix the SOEs. And on those fronts, we didn't find much of substance. Many of the things we have heard today, we've heard them before and we haven't seen much action on them.
How confident are you when it comes to the targets, especially when we talk about digital migration, when we talk about stabilizing South Africa's energy supply, which is a constraint to the economy at this point? Do we think we've got the will to do it?
It's difficult to have confidence because on the digital spectrum, we've heard that story for the last decade. I think on Eskom, leave aside the load shedding, there is some progress, but when the economy is seeing load shedding on a daily basis, it's difficult to maintain morale. So I think on the Eskom front, they need to really rapidly escalate the targets. They need to assist Eskom to invest in new generation, deal with the maintenance, the load shedding. But equally on Transnet, on PRASA, we're not seeing much action. And I think for us, those are the things which really need to be dealt with urgently. But to be fair to government, there is good progress on SARS and collecting more revenues. And we need to see those kind of things being enhanced. But on a macro scale, we don't see what's going to grow the economy, what's going to fix the SOEs, what's going to fix local government, what's going to fix corruption. We heard promises, but not much details.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Parks. Well, we're now going to cross to Bulelani for more analysis.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. I see the president is actually making his way to where he's expected to be addressing the media on the passing away of former President FW de Klerk. We are told that he's going to be sending a message that will be broadcast to the nation just shortly, and is of course accompanied by several ministers here in the precinct. Of course, we have to just stop this political and economic reactions here in the precinct of Parliament until the president has addressed that, and we'll continue with normal programming and reactions.
Well, thank you for being here. Earlier today, I received a message from Mrs. De Klerk informing me about the sad passing of FW de Klerk. I expressed my condolences and the government's condolences to herself, the children, as well as the de Klerk family. We are saddened that FW de Klerk has passed away. He was 85 years old and had not been well for some time. It saddens us because he did play a key role in ushering in democracy in our country. He was a leader of a party that was largely discredited in relation to the role that the National Party played in enforcing apartheid. But he had the courage to step away from the path that his party that he led had embarked upon from 1948. And we will remember him for that. And of course, the policies that the apartheid regime espoused and implemented have wreaked a lot of havoc on millions and millions of South Africans. And it was the havoc that many of our people will never forget and have suffered from. But as a human being, it is important for us as South Africans to pay our condolences and to allow him to go and rest because he was not well towards the end. And it is in this regard that Our hearts are with the de Klerk family, with Mrs. Elita de Klerk. And I'd like to say that we will wait for the FW de Klerk Foundation to tell us about the details of his funeral and what they have in mind. And as government, we stand ready, as always, to work with the de Klerk family, as well as with his foundation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, President Cyril Ramaphosa sharing his sentiments on the passing of former President FW de Klerk, also sending his condolences to the de Klerk family. We did get that news a little bit earlier on, even though in the background we have that business of the day, the medium-term budget policy statement. To go into more analysis of what we've heard about a few minutes ago, we are joined by Issa Mhlanga, who's the Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes. Issa, thank you so much for your time. Your initial reaction in terms of what the Minister delivered?
I think this is a good budget if you consider that it's restructuring spending away from current spending towards investment. What we've seen in the 3 years before the pandemic, government spending was growing positively. Now what is projected is that government consumption is going to be contracting for 3 consecutive years. On the investment side, what we observe is following many years of contraction in investment, the next 3 years are going to see positive growth in investment. That is where the growth story that is going to underpin much of the medium-term expenditure framework is going to come from. But also, if you look in terms of debt, it now peaks, so there is a consolidation that continues. So essentially, the difference between Finance Minister Godongwana and former Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is the type of shoes they're wearing, because they are now continuing with the fiscal consolidation that is set in February.
Issa, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. That is Issa Mhlanga, who's the Chief Economist at Alexander Forbes. Bulelani, over to you.
All right, thanks, Nastasia. Once again, now joining me is SARS Commissioner Edward Kiswita to talk to us around the issues of revenue. Mr. Kiswita, thank you so much for joining us. An announcement that revision collection is revised upwards to about 120 billion rand. How did we get there?
Well, I think as the Minister announced, some of that is as a result of better than expected performance, particularly in the mining sector that was boosted by the commodity prices, but also about a 10% increase in production. And then, of course, there is the consistent efforts by SARS. You would know that we are rebuilding SARS, improving our capacity, and encouragingly that's beginning to show some fruits. And so we are confident that the revenue that the Minister announced today, we will certainly be committed to achieving it. There are some downside risks that's out of our control. Firstly, if the economic assumptions don't materialize. Secondly, if we experience further load losses, further load losses, which just puts a brake on the economy and in fact destroys some economic capacity. And then lastly, we still don't know what the fourth wave will do. So those are some of the downside risks, but the SARS team, they will be committed to ensure that what the Minister announced today will be achieved.
Talking about building capacity within SARS, given the past of state capture, how confident are you that maybe we are out of the woods by now, or is it still an ongoing process?
Sadly, we are not out of the woods. You know, when capacity is destroyed, when trust is eroded, it takes years to restore that. And so we are hard at work to rebuild the capacity. That means, first of all, we have to change the mindset and the culture within SARS, the ethos, the integrity with which we behave and engage with taxpayers. Secondly, we have to make sure that the technical skills we've lost, that we bring them back, and that is underway. Thirdly, we must develop future skills such as data scientists to enhance our artificial intelligence work. And then very importantly, to accelerate our modernization of our systems and technology. SARS is a technology and data-driven organization. And unless we modernize those systems, both within our tax and customs environment, we will not be able to give the kind of response that is necessary in a highly complex world.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Edward Kisweta. As SARS Commissioner, quite upbeat about revenue collection as well as developing the capacity within SARS. We now cross back again to Anastasia.
Thank you so much, Bulelani. Well, with me, I've got Lindiwe Zulu, who's the Minister of Social Development. Minister, thank you so much for your time. In the build-up to the speech that we heard earlier, we've spoken to members representing civil society, representing NGOs, as well as Labour. From a social aspect, did this budget policy statement, tick off the box for you?
Yes, it did tick off the box. Firstly, from a point of view of that when it comes to issues of social development and what government has done, in particular during the period of COVID-19, and the lessons that have been learned, as well as how government packaged the support to our people. This is a mid-term budget, and I'm sure that you did hear the minister speaking about the fact that all the other issues which are of major interest obviously to people who are in my space, which is the 350, he did indicate that government had taken a decision to extend it until March next year, number one. Number two, we shouldn't look at that support in an isolated manner. We should look at that support broadly, and therefore the issues of growing the economy, the issues of transformation are all very important to us too as a Department of Social Development, because ultimately we'd like to have a social security package that really assists our people to grow, even for themselves, something that can support them. With regard to the extension, there is no need for us to be talking about the extension at the moment right now, because the minister did indicate that the conversations are still continuing. Let's wait until February. The 350 ends in March in any case. So right now we are in deep conversations about the future.
Thank you so much, Minister. Well, the man of the moment is with us right now. That, of course, is Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, to give us his perspective and build on some of the stuff that we've heard a little bit earlier on. Minister, thank you so much for your time. Your initial, message in the beginning of the speech.
Should I take it off?
You can keep your mask on, sir, for the purposes of being responsible South African citizens.
Okay. No, I'm asking you.
So let's talk about this balancing act everyone was talking about, balancing economic growth with social recovery. How hard was it for you to be able to do that with this particular speech?
Look, it's hard in an environment when the economy is not growing. One of the things we show people is that when they compare us with other countries, we're saying the rate at which we're borrowing the interest rate is higher than the growth of the economy. What that means is that it's not going to be easy to compare us with other countries. So we're doing tough decisions of saying, you've got to make this choice because the economy is not in a position to recover, and how do you deal with these people? Because there's no prospect of employment in the next year. You see what I mean? So you've got to think about what do we do to cushion the impact.
One of the aspects, of course, we are in a pandemic, we are dealing with that, but the other issue, I suppose, call it the elephant in the room, is the energy supply issues that are an impediment to our economic growth as well as businesses. How do we work around that in getting Eskom to be where we need it to be from an energy point of view?
Let me just say, you said my statement, I said I'm no longer talking Eskom, because Eskom, we've tried to do this thing for 13 years, and we've pumped money into them for 13 years, as they were in 2008 today. So what we need to do, even if they were to attempt to put new capacity, they're going to replace the decommissioned station. So what we need is a creative environment where more players come in and put electricity to the grid.
I can see you're pressed for time. Speaking on that creative environment, the reforms that the rating agencies would be looking out for, is it enough to stimulate growth in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
Look, if I had my way, growing the economy was like taking a matches and box and light it, it grows. I would do it. But the growing an economy is a complex matter. There are many pieces you've got to move in order to make sure that it grows. So what we're trying to do more on a scale basis is to try and move those pieces.
Minister, thank you so much for your time. That is Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana giving us his perspective in terms of those pieces that he talks about, that it is a complex situation in terms of growing the economy. Many pieces have to come together. One of the issues that our economists spoken extensively about, of course, has been energy supply, has been making sure that we balance that expenditure with social recovery, given the context that we are in right now. So over to you, Bulelani.
Thank you once again, Anastasia. Of course, we're trying to get as many reactions as we can on the medium-term budget policy statement. Joining me now is Minister in the Presidency, Mr. Mondli Gungubele. Mr. Gungubele, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, you lead a very important department that deals with issues of monitoring government performance. I want to know now, the department has been established for a couple of years. Do you have systems in place to do that monitoring?
Yes, we have. There's always a big room for improvement, and we are hard at work now to make sure that that department is an infrastructure that helps the president to make credible undertakings, to make credible pronouncement, to take the state, the country along on credible information. Thus, in essence, is our job to make sure that we follow the entire state and the entire country. That machinery is in place. Of course, there's always a room for improvement, which we are doing now.
There's been a lot of emphasis on infrastructure spend. Previously, there's been a whole lot of row around the issue of money that was meant to be allocated for infrastructure, but there was no fruits or meaningful outputs coming from that money. This time around, how are you going to ensure that those monies that have been allocated in the medium term actually go to the intended projects?
The Cabinet Lekgotla met this year to make about 7 priorities. One of those priorities is infrastructure, because for productive capacity to be sustained, you need industrial networks to be in place. That is your transportation, your water, your energy, your information flow. All those things, if they are not in place, every growth is just a storm of the moment. So we are happy that that is in the priorities, but however, I will be crisscrossing the country to report already significant amount of work on infrastructure under the Infrastructure South Africa as led by Dr. Ramkhopa. A lot of work we're not speaking about, and we're trying to correct that. Going forward, the way we monitor this one is going to actually assist us on a platform to continue to monitor that which is going to be spent. But I want to say this. What is key about today is that budget policy, medium-term policy statement is about articulating the intention of government. The minister was very clear that we have to be on a recovery path. At the same time, we can't leave behind those who are desperate, who don't have food on their table. This is how, in my view, this budget was balanced. And again, what it dealt with today, because critical is to create an environment where economies start to flourish. 3 areas are important: security cluster, and the governance, regulatory costs, and the structural reforms. All those are key to the environment that will turn around the economy. That's how balanced, and that statement has been properly made in my view.
I'm going to leave it there. Mr. Mondli Gungubele, I wish I could have asked you more time on load shedding, but we'll have an opportunity next time. Mondli Gungubele, he is the Minister in the Presidency. For more reaction, Anastasia is standing by.
Thank you so much, Bulelani. Well, with me, I've got Sinawa Tambo, who is the head of presidency with the Economic Freedom Fighters. Sinawa, thank you so much for your time. The minister mentioned just before you and I are having our conversation right now that an economy is quite complex. A lot of parts need to come together. Given that context and the way we come into this medium-term budget policy statement, what do you make of what was delivered today?
Look, the mid-term budget speech delivered by Enoch Godongwana today is just a further confirmation that he is cut from the same austerity cloth as his predecessors, such as Tito Mboweni, and that even when he was internally leading economic transformation in the ANC, he could never come up with a sophisticated policy to create employment and to grow our economy. So their over-reliance on direct foreign investment. They have an over-reliance on private investment and privatization because they have a naive assumption that the private sector is less corrupt than the public sector, which is not based on any objective reality. So we are not surprised by the midterm budget that has been delivered today because we expected that they have a policy posture of over-reliance on investment where there's been no verifiable evidence that the private sector has the interests of this economy at heart. Rather, it is more committed to making profit than anything else.
What does the right policy then look like that would have ticked at least one or two boxes for you right now and perhaps even better in February next year?
Any economic policy, right, that seeks to put South Africa as a global competitor economically must surround itself and base itself on industrialization. So if you want to create jobs, you must revive internal industry and remove the continent and specifically South Africa from the dependent character it has on investment by the private sector. So if a policy doesn't have that at its core, then you have a Minister of Finance who says that there are state-owned entities that are not strategic. You have a Minister of Finance that says that you must practice tough love on institutions that are supposed to sustain the economic sovereignty of the country. So all of these terms, restructuring these SOEs, are just code words for privatization instead of building self-capacity to grow our economy. So any economic policy must anchor itself on industrialization, must pivot itself from SOEs. If we look at China, if you look at the global East, that is what has pivoted these nations to become superpowers economically in the nation. So their character of the ANC and the policy posture of the Minister of Finance is no different from his predecessor. It's no different from the so-called economic recovery plan that was drafted by Investec and Stephen Keshoff and the likes previously. So we were not shocked by this, and nothing is going to come in February as well that is going to be of any substantial meaning or change in terms of economic policy.
Senawa, thank you so much for your time. That is Senawa Tambo, is the head of presidency at the Economic Freedom Fighters, giving us his perspective, or rather his take, on what the minister delivered earlier today. Bulelani?
All right, thank you so much, Anastasia. We're taking more reaction here on the floor. Joining me now is ANC spokesman, Mr. Pule Mabe. Mr. Mabe, the trajectory has been put down by the finance minister. Is it pro-poor and will lead to job creation and growth?
Yes, of course, it is a pro-poor budget. 60% of the expenditure is being directed towards basic services, and this is consistent with the commitments and promises we've made, even in our own local government manifesto. People are aware of the challenges that we were facing. The economy was not doing well, in part because of the pandemic. But we have been able to steer the ship. A number of measures have been undertaken. There's been the presidential stimulus packages intended to create the much needed jobs, give relief through your social relief grants of 350. Those have at least given families a sense of stability under heightened conditions of the pandemic. There's been TERS, the temporary employment relief schemes, to be able to assist those companies that could not be able to perform under conditions of COVID.
But there is still this concern of load shedding where there is still no finality. When is it going to come to an end, particularly from the investment sector?
Well, there are a number of things that are being undertaken, including transitioning to a low carbon economy. There's been a pronouncement about some investments that are going to be made coming out of the United Nations to assist South Africa to be able to transition. This morning, I heard the CEO of Eskom beginning to even talk about electric motor vehicles as part of the things that we've got to begin looking at as part of transitioning to a low carbon economy.
But the money that has been loaned or given to South Africa, does it come with no strings attached?
Well, I wouldn't know. I've not seen the conditions attached to what has been given. What we are hoping is that it will be able to facilitate a just transition that is not going to undermine economic growth, because that is what we are advocating for. That yes, indeed, we need just transition, but that just transition must not undermine economic growth. It must be able to contribute towards stimulating economic growth while dealing with environmental issues.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Pule Mabe. He is the ANC's national spokesperson. And now I'm going to cross with my colleague, Anastasia Rense, to bring this special broadcast. Probably towards the end, your takeaways in this budget?
I think I found it to be quite a mixed budget, especially when you speak to the different parties, whether you're looking at it from an economic, from a labor point of view, from aspects where people were looking to hear certain crucial information. What was encouraging is that the energy supply issue is top of mind. Being able to stimulate economic growth in order for us to make some kind of positive dent on that unemployment number is actually on the cards. We do need to see a little bit more detail going into next year in terms of what the plans actually entail and how they will actually be able to deliver that. Remember, I mentioned a little bit earlier on the minister saying that the economy is quite complex. So a lot of parts need to come together. So it's going to be quite interesting to see in February what those parts will look like.
I'm also intrigued by the figure of the growth forecast for the year. It's put at 5.1%. Given the current circumstances with load shedding as well as the lockdowns, do you think it's a realistic number?
It's quite interesting because, when we look at where we are from a vaccination rollout point of view, a lot of the economic recovery is going to hinge on ramping up that vaccination rollout, which he did talk about a little bit earlier on. But what was quite interesting is where his growth projections are sitting when you look at from an economic growth globally, as well as from a domestic point of view. Some of the aspects that I know other people in parts of society will be looking out for is, of course, what's going to happen post the judicial inquiry into state capture. He touched on that in this speech, saying that there are deficiencies in the system that need to be reined in, especially when we look at public procurement of goods. So at least we're hearing the right noises. I'm just not sure whether it's satisfied everyone. And you actually kind of wonder whether there is a budget that ticks off the boxes for all parties of society.
Quite interesting. Social relief measures, there's a couple of numbers that have come out. I'm quite intrigued or interested in how they will roll out this accessing of retirement funds. It's been something that's been in the pipeline, but of course there's always reactions as to whether it can be carried out in a correct way without some of the money going into the wrong hands.
Yes. So he spoke of a two-part system. So we'll like to see a little bit more detail on how that will work, whether the two-part system involves having workers take a portion of their money and yet on the same end putting some back. So perhaps that it might work in that particular fashion. The other interesting was the small business support measures where, broadening the types of financial institutions that will be able to provide funding, such as DFIs and non-banks. But it's actually quite interesting if we could get the perspective from those in the financial sector. Does it, mean everything and anything increasing funding for, small businesses? Are there other aspects in which we can able to help small businesses without necessarily going this route? So that needs a little bit more unpacking, perhaps from the minister next year, in terms of the true role these institutions will play, and also case studies. It would be nice to see some case studies that have worked in other countries as well.
On the other hand, just before we go with infrastructure development, it's been put at over 500 billion, but there is still a shortfall in terms of the money that's needed. We're still going to have a difficulty in terms of rolling out these infrastructure projects.
Yes, that is quite interesting as well, and those infrastructure projects are going to rely on spending. So again, we come back to that balancing act of being able to support social recovery, but at the same time watching your spending. And this is where the private sector would need to come in, but they need confidence. They need to know that, one, we've got stable energy supply, that policy is moving in the right direction, in order for them to say, well, this is a country we can plug in money for the next 10, 15 or 20 years or so. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarity on that.
Well, I'm told we have run out of time, so we're going to bring this live broadcast to a close. My name is Bulelani Philip.
And I'm Nastasia Arendse, and we'll be with you next year, February, right here at the precinct in Parliament to get a little bit more detail for you.